pretentious, if nothing else. Particularly when you write them yourself, you know, you write yourself and you send it to them and then they get up there and read it, so. When Mark invited me to come and talk to you this morning, I appreciate the chance to do so. The neighborhood is very familiar. My office is only a half a block away on 200 West there, next door to Toasters, and so and I was there for a long time, so, well, until the pandemic, you know, the pandemic kind of did everything in, not only Creative Mornings, but my office as well, so, but I appreciate the chance to be here and chat with you a little bit about it. This past fall, I presented at Salt Lake Design Week, and gave a presentation I called The Greatest Hits in the History of Graphic Design. Because I've taught at the University of Utah graphic design history for more than 30 years, and did so as an adjunct instructor, you know, never teaching more than one class a semester, and because I was running a business as well. But I always enjoyed it. For one thing, it brought a lot of interns and employees and worked out well. And so at Salt Lake Design Week, I volunteered to give this presentation on the greatest hits in graphic design. And when Mark invited me to come and talk to you this morning, I considered kind of combining things. You know, I thought about my career in graphic design, but I also thought a lot about this class that I've taught for such a long time, and realized after, you know, I started teaching that class in history about 15 years into my career, and you know, I started looking back on my career and starting to realize that, you know, I was part of the history, and I started to recognize in my own portfolio things that that I had followed in terms of graphic design style and trends and the history of graphic design itself. So at any rate, I decided to kind of incorporate maybe a little bit about the history of graphic design together with my own portfolio. Because when it's happening, you don't realize it at the time, but you know, you are part of a graphic design history, both modern and postmodern. And so when I graduated from the University of Utah in graphic design in 1972, at the time, the Swiss school was predominant in higher education in the design world. The Swiss school, otherwise known as the International Typographic School, and the name reflects the idea that the International School of Architecture also has the same kind of conceptual ideas behind it in architecture as it does in graphic design. And so thus they have a similar name, but the movement grew out of the modernist era, grew out of ideas that were coming out of the Bauhaus in Germany, out of the Distill movement in the Netherlands, and constructivism in Russia, and particularly at the time of the 70s, the Swiss movement lasted quite a long time, but it was very predominant in academia. It was the style. When I was in school, it was about the only approach to design that was really part of our education, the Swiss school. And Swiss school, or International Typographic School, began in Switzerland in the 40s and 50s. People like Max Huber, Anton Stankowski, 1971. This was a graphic standards manual for the city of Berlin, created by Stankowski. And you can see that this style remained consistent for a long period of time. This is Armin Hoffman. You'll start to recognize, if you're not already familiar with the style, you know, flush left, rag right, typography, sans serif always, In the beginning, they use Accidents Grotesque. Later on, Helvetica, that came out in 1957, was the preferred style. Vivarelli, this flush left, rag right typography. This is, grids, purity of form, emphasis upon photography as opposed to illustration. One of my instructors at the University of Utah was named Roland Ziegler from Basel, Switzerland. He could hardly even speak English on his first year up at the U. So clearly, my education was deeply influenced by Swiss design or the international typographic style. So it comes as no surprise that my first job, I was offered 2 jobs in Salt Lake. One of them at a small design firm for $500 a month. The other one at a large corporation. The church, the Mormon church, hired me for $600 a month. I thought, I'm going to take that one. And not surprisingly, I, started working there doing Swissy kind of stuff because that's the kind of education I had. So when I was challenged to design a booklet for prison services, there I'm doing these kind of abstract sorts of designs, very purity of form. Same thing with the a booklet for the same organization on suicidal behavior, all these kind of graphic sort of styles, not very similar to the Swiss style that I had been educated in. I remember when I designed this, I was worried that someone was going to ask me, well, was the ratio really 1 out of 16 for suicide people or something? Yeah. No one asked me that question, so I was glad they didn't, because I didn't have an answer particularly. But, the inside's typical Helvetica, grids, flush left, rag right typography. I even did the same thing when I designed, freelance jobs, such as an interior designer. It was an envelope design for William Hughes, and Helvetica again, naturally. Envelopes. It's too bad we don't design letterheads and envelopes anymore. We used to have a lot of fun doing those things. But even other freelance jobs, when I designed for Sunstone Foundation, a kind of liberal publisher of liberal in terms of the conservative nature of the religion. Sunstone published a calendar, and I designed that in Helvetica too, a very Swissy looking thing. And yet, at the same time, I was really part of the postmodern movement in the terms that in the 70s, particularly by the late 70s, people were starting to get a little tired of the purity of form of the Swiss school. A lot of the grids and all of the rules and regulations that were very typical in the Swiss school. And people were starting to push back and do other things. Retro, kind of a look back to the past, was becoming popular. The work of Paula Scheer, who now a partner at Pentagram, but at the time was working for CBS Records, and look back to Russian constructivism using the very iconic red and black, although she used wood type, which is interesting, but also the 45-degree angles, which is very much reminiscent of the constructivists in Russia. And the great Fred Woodward, who was the phenomenal magazine designer for a long time at Rolling Stone magazine, also picking up on the constructivist era, the red and black, and taking some of the characters and turning them the other direction to simulate acrylic characters. Paula Scheer again did an ad for Swatch watches, which looked very much like, in fact, some have suggested it was more than inspiration, but maybe plagiarism. But, I know that's a debate that you could. But between Paula Scheer's work for Swatch Watch and picking up on a poster of Herbert Matter from 1935. You know, this was the kind of thing that was a pushback in the postmodern movement to all of the Swissy kind of stuff. Also vernacular design, closely related to retro design, Duffy Design Group, and Charles Spencer Anderson, who put together a whole career on picking up on this vernacular kind of retro stuff. So I too clearly was influenced by that, because the very next year, 1978, you know, I had done the Swissy poster just back right there, right, in Helvetica. And so very next year, 1979, instead I do this kind of decorative kind of a thing with, you know, slab serif typeface and lots of Scotch rules and funny little things for the numbers, you know, pushing away from that Swiss school of design. A letterhead for a company that, you know, that kind of crazy retro-looking typography. I was clearly bipolar when I was, you know, interested in both the Swissy school as well as these postmodern retro kinds of things. In 1991, I was pleased to be able to design all of the graphics for the Utah Arts Festival. And it was a fun project. And I had been teaching the history of graphic design for about only 3 or 4 or 5 years. And I ran across, you know, in my history class, I ran across this poster from 1937 of Robert Berney, and I really loved it. And clearly, it was a direct reference when I designed all the graphics for the Utah Arts Festival. But that turned out to be kind of an interesting story, because 2 or 3 years after designing this poster, I got a call from a New York art gallery, and they said, "Are you the designer of the '91 Utah Arts Festival poster?" And I said, "Well, yes, I am." And they said, "Would you send us a copy of that poster?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." You know, I said, "You know, it's not every day I get a call from a New York art gallery asking me about a poster I designed and asking for a copy of it." I said, "Why?" And they said, oh, it's Stephen Heller's book." I said, "Stephen Heller?" And if you know that name, if you put Stephen Heller into Amazon, you'll find he's the most prolific author about graphic design ever written. He's got like hundreds of books. So I said, "Well, you know, I need to get a hold of this book." And here it is, Borrowed Design. The use and abuse of historic form. And here I am, right in the middle of the book, under the headline, Art Deco ad nauseum, which Stephen Heller makes a valid point that the Utah Art Festival had absolutely nothing to do with the Art Deco era. And why was I referencing this very famous poster of Robert Berney from the Art Deco era in the Utah Arts Festival? And I really had no explanation for that. It was, you know, I just liked it, you know, and I did it. Although if Stephen Heller had been around Salt Lake at the time, he would have indeed been nauseated, because I mean, it was everywhere. It was. I mean, people were, you know, holding cups and wearing T-shirts. It was all over the place. I later was somewhat vindicated, I suppose, because when I was in New York, I visited the Brown Reinhold Gallery, who was the ones that asked for my poster, and identified myself and described the poster, and she said, "Oh yes, we remember that very well. In fact," they said, "we used to have your poster hanging up right alongside the Robert Berney one in our gallery." So I thought, well, that's okay. And I have since even become casual friends with Stephen Heller, using actually this whole thing as an excuse to get to know him. Other trends, typographic expressionism. This was another, kind of postmodern development that really became popular, and the most prolific designer of the typographic expression was undoubtedly Herbert. Typographic expression was inside Herb LeBallon, who could take together an ampersand and stick it inside of an O, and just amazing qualities to communicating ideas beyond, the form or the letters and the meaning of those letters themselves. An ad, when he was in an advertising agency, the idea of using those letter forms. He also got involved in magazine design and designed a logotype for a magazine called Avant-Garde, and all of the cool little ligatures that Herb LeBallon had there were so popular, and the demand became for designing a typeface, and so Avant-Garde typeface. In fact, it led LeBallon to start a whole new company called International Typeface Corporation that designed and developed typefaces and distributed them. And unlike others at the time, they were paying royalties to the designers of those fonts. So I too, of course, was doing my own typographic expressionism, whether it was a little logotype, it's just a business card for, an electrical contractor, or back again at the church in 1975, I designed all the materials for this gigantic conference, and I loved the idea of combining this Spencerian script, which I had all drawn out with, of course, pencil and paper, and that's the way we did things at the time, and then combining that with Futura Extra Bold, it's just like the oddest kind of combination between, the fine lines of Spencerian script and Futura Extra Bold. I love that kind of combination. Had a lot of fun with that. Freelance jobs. I was doing all these kind of wild, this is weird stuff. I drew it all and just paint and ink and stuff. Someone else turned it into a sign, I guess. But another kind of movement going on the same new wave was kind of a pushback against, in fact, they called it otherwise known as Swiss punk. It too was a pushback on the modernism movement, and some of the practitioners include Michael Vanderbilt, part of the other Michaels in the Bay Area, who did some cool stuff that really falls in this new wave kind of category. Dan Friedman in New York actually studied in Basel for a while, came back. He's part of this Swiss punk kind of direction. Paint strokes, these paint strokes, they were all over the place in this new wave movement. Or splattered ink, this was another kind of jazz. So, when I was in a business partnership with Larry Clarkson and Smith and Clarkson, and we got some printer to do a self-promotion piece with us, and what did we do? Paint strokes all left and right, and I remember going to the photo shoot with this woman here and dabbing paint all over the place, and purple and green. What could be more 80s than that? And dots all over the place, and universe, italic, condensed, just so typical of the time period. A printer engaged us, and I designed. It was so fun because they wanted to do a brochure that showed off our capabilities. Their name was ProLitho, and they had no production budget because they were the printer. I mean, they said, "Oh yeah, do whatever you want: die cuts, weird inks, color, funny papers, the whole thing." This is translucent paper on the cover, craft paper on the back, with spot colors on top, which had to be underpressed with white ink in order to reproduce well. And we shot photographs, and guess who shot those photographs? Michael Schoenfeld, sitting right there in front of me. Do you remember that, Michael? Vaguely, a long time ago. We shot photographs of pros which tied into the company name Prolitho. Even, arthroscopic surgeons in a conference, was determined to get in those brushstrokes, in this new wave thing for a kneecap. And of course, this is all done by traditional media. Cheryl Crane, don't ask me what these little squiggles meant on her letter C, but her initials were C, and so new wave treatment all around. Corporate identity, really became a big thing, before I graduated the school, 50s and 60s, when corporate identity, and of course, corporate identity and visual systems continue this to be an important thing, but it began back with individuals like Paul Rand, who designed, he took slab serif typeface City and turned it into a logo for IBM, or Saul Bass, who did the work for, none of you remember, but at one time there was only one phone company from coast to coast, only one. They owned all the phones, they owned the lines, they owned everything, the Bell telephone system. And supposedly this was the most expensive identity project ever created ever in the history of graphic design by Saul Bass. Massimo Vignelli in New York City created the iconic standards for the subway system, and even to this day, anyone who visits New York thinks about New York visually in terms of those iconic subway signs designed by Massimo Vignelli. This happens to be a display in the Museum of Modern Art on the very subject. So when it comes to corporate identity, I too, back to my very first job, and what turned out to be my only job, because after I worked at the church, I went into business myself, and that was the rest of my career. But back in the mid-70s, I just scanned this photograph. This is a 50-year-old photograph I just scanned this week for this presentation. In the mid-70s, the church had no logo, had no identity system whatsoever. Every little department had its own look and feel. And the graphic design department had the opportunity to propose to all of the leadership of the church the idea of implementing a logo and an identity system. And I was part of the team that designed the logo, and I wrote and designed this visual identity. We called it a visual identity, not a corporate identity. It felt corporate identity was a little too business-like. But it was the first time they had ever had anything like it. We introduced 16 different language versions of a logo, and they've since changed the logo 2 or 3 times since the mid-70s. But this, of course, was before the digital era, so we were providing all of the specifications on how to lay out things and typeset things, and provide the direction for putting together a whole system. Much more recently, 2008, I designed an identity for a company. It was at the time called UCN. We helped them change their name to In Contact. Another thing I kind of regretted losing, we used to design a lot of pocket folders. Pocket folders, a little folder that you put things in, and one of the Modern 8 team took the logo itself and turned it into the means to hold together the pocket folder itself, and inside, bright color. That was always fun. The print era is gone, but when you're my age, you kind of hate to see it go. It's also fun to see your logo up there in 15-foot letters at the top of the building as well. So, I've designed lots of logos and for a long time. Structural Systems, they were a construction company. There's another one of these envelopes displays, square flap envelope, emboss the logo on the back or put it on forms. But I've designed many, but I promised myself that I would not talk too long today, because when I spoke at Salt Lake Design Week, I had hoped that I would speak maybe an hour and 15 minutes. I think about an hour and a half into it, I looked at my wife, and she was going, like this, and she said, I think you were closer to 2 hours, so I promised myself I would not do that today. I'm on Instagram, and you're welcome to follow me there. And despite the fact I have the cutest grandchildren in the world, I don't post them on my Instagram page. In fact, I'm more often posting my portfolio or interesting photographs or whatnot. So that's it. I'm done, Mark.